Hello, and welcome to the Lend Hoping Nothing podcast. I'm Michael Humphreys. I'm happy to be talking to you today. This is episode 27, and today I'm going to be talking about some of the thoughts I've had about Lucrum Cessans. And as anyone who is familiar with this podcast knows, I will never pronounce Latin words correctly. So I was talking to my thesis director about profit ceasing, as it's probably poorly translated into English, and he pronounced it very smoothly, and I will never be able to do that. In any case, a few updates first. It's been a few months since I've recorded something, but I went to the Paris conference for the Aquinomics presentation or conference, and it was really quite interesting. I was surprised at what people talked about, because I thought it was going to be more about economics and less about what it ended up being about, which was more, philosophical, I guess. And so, but nevertheless, it was quite interesting. My presentation on usury came between two others who presented on usury, but it ended up that, whereas I was defending that usury still mattered and was relevant, they argued ultimately that it was no longer relevant. One of the authors argued, if I recall correctly, something along the lines of, Aquinas admits that the government or the state can tolerate usury, and so it's just a natural part of the market economy. It wasn't quite that unsophisticated, but it was far from convincing. And the other guy, whose articles I've been reading, argued that Hugo Grotius got us out of the so-called mutuum trap. And I read through what Grotius says, and I'm still not convinced, because the argument went that what Grotius does is he argues that there remains a sort of ownership that's retained by the lender, and this justifies the usury that the lender takes. And Grotius says something like that. Yeah, he says that the willingness, I guess, or the agreement to receive what he gave back in kind is a type of ownership. And so I have to reread it if he actually said that was the reason. But he doesn't go into depth on what exactly that's supposed to mean. And it's it's far from clear that that's true in any legal sense, certainly. But it's certainly not true in a sense that's going to get you around Aquinas' argument, because, yeah. Anyway, so it was still quite interesting what we ended up talking about, but it wasn't quite what I thought it was, and I think I gave the most. Well, my own self-evaluation probably doesn't mean much, but one of the the people at the conference asked both the others, like, well, what about things that aren't money and lending things that aren't money? Because your argument seems to rely on the thing being lent being money. And I don't think either of them had a good response to that. Whereas, in my understanding, it's that sort of resolution is internal to my theory. So, whereas they focus on the nature of money or something, when you look at it from the respect of property and property rights, you kind of get around this whole issue of, well, what if I lend money versus corn versus any consumable thing? So that was quite interesting. But yeah, moving full bore on the PhD thesis, I've started writing stuff, and I've started reading a lot of economics. Bohm, Keynes, Fisher, and I've started reading another kind of more contemporary author. I don't know what his book is right now, but Minsky, I think it is, argues for economic fragility, where or instability. And so there's a sense in which he's arguing that, at least as far as I understand, I haven't read the whole book yet, that there's a certain incoherence to capitalist economies where you have highly sophisticated financial institutions. And so, whereas in sort of the neoclassical view, and this is what he says, I don't really have a good knowledge of the different schools to be able to say whether this is right or wrong, but in the neoclassical view, an increase in demand is going to shift prices up, and if prices go down, there'll be a increase in demand. And so there's a fundamental relationship where there's an inverse relationship between demand and price, and supply in there as well. But one of the interesting points he made was a lot of the time what we see with various financial instruments is that an increase in price will often increase the demand. And so you see stock going up in price, and everyone wants to get on board because they see the stock going up, and so they want to get it while it's still going up. And that's in sort of the quantitative finance space, it's like a momentum strategy. So you look for a momentum signal that prices are going to keep going up for a while, and so you try to take advantage of that. Which is, you can. I started reading a lot about what is it called? High frequency trading a while back, and so that's one of the strategies is in high frequency trading is that you detect some sort of signal in your model or algorithm of this momentum, and so the price is going to go up. Everyone's going to start getting on board because they see the price going up, and more people, and it gets higher and higher, and it's a really bizarre phenomenon because you, according to the neoclassic theory as explained by Minsky, that seems like the opposite of what you would think would happen, because you would think as the price goes up, the demand would go down, but an increase in price actually increases the demand as well. And you can also see this in certain luxury goods as well, where you can actually increase the price and it actually increases demand because, or even contextualizing it in different respects. And so you can, if you put a really expensive Lamborghini or I don't know what the other really expensive cars are, but if you put it in like a car show with other cars, it looks like way overpriced. But if you put it in a in a plane show where people are buying private jets, it looks like, lunch money. And so contextualizing things can also drive up demand. And then one of the other examples I had heard of was like even at like a fast food restaurant, like the way that you price something is itself a signal of where it kind of fits in the framework of the world, or our vision of the world, our perceptual framework, the semiotic network of signs and relations and things. And so some restaurant had some food that was not selling well, and they're like, well, we could lower the price, which neoclassical, I guess, thing to do. Kind of straightforward, lower the price, can increase demand, and you'll have more sales. The issue, of course, was that maybe that wouldn't work. And so the consultant suggested, like, well, why don't you just, increase prices? See what it happens. So what's the worst that happens? You have some new valuable information that, well, it doesn't work. And what they actually saw was that it actually increased demand, because now it was, the way that the consultant explained it was that it was priced at the level of a luxury. And so once you increased the price, it contextualized it in a different sense, and so it actually drove up demand. And I think that probably has to do with how we see stocks, because as Aristotle says, there's no limit to our desire for more money. And so that sort of momentum play is driven by the desire for more money. And so the stock goes up and you want more money, so you're putting in more, and it goes up more and more people put in more and more, and it just goes and goes. Whereas with commodities, there's a sense in which there's a natural limit to it. And so it's like, well, I only need so much. And so by having that natural limit on it, it puts it within a framework that's much different than other financial instruments. Anyway, that's not what this episode is about, though. I'm happy that I thought about this a little bit more. So a few months ago, I think it was, a priest and I got into a discussion about usury. And I was probably a little bit more abrasive than I should have been. But it's neither here nor there at this point. But one of the things that he had said was, it's always bothered me about Lucrum Cessans. And to put this within perspective, if you don't know what that is, in the usury debate, Lucrum Cessans was this title to the profit you could have made had you not lent. So if you have money in your business that was meant to go to, generating some profit, then you could require the borrower to pay you back some portion of that. And the argument really derived from this point Aquinas had made about, restitution of virtual profits. And the thing that got me was when this priest had said, well, so like there's so many restitutions in our economy, and it's like all over the place. And I thought that was a really bizarre claim. And maybe it was him or maybe it was someone else. It's been a while since I looked at that conversation, that like so much of our economy is based on these mutual restitutions of profits that no one actually ever made. So instead of like going out and, making something, I stop making something, give someone else money, and then tell them they have to give me the profit for the stuff I was gonna make, which is just like, it sounds just insane to me that it's like, well, I was going to contribute to the economy, but here, you can borrow this money and then you can pay me for the contribution I was going to make. So, which is very different from like, a secured loan, which is my whole shtick, I guess, with usury, where it's like you're actually buying a claim against some real property. So it's like an investment in a thing, rather than the sort of unsecured mutuum loan. But that was one of the things where I started being like, well, so what is this thing, Lucrum, Cessans, and then Damum Emergens? And there was a few things looking at Aquinas and how he talks about it. And it's a very short passage. Second part of the second part, question 78, article 2, and then response to the first objection, where he's really saying, well, is there anything that you can, any compensation or recompensia, depending on if you're using classical Latin or ecclesial Latin pronunciation, both of which I'm terrible at. I probably mix them up all the time. But so he has the first part where he says, well, if you're going to lose something that you ought to have, then you can enter into agreement with the borrower to cover that cost or pay you back or something. And that's like, okay. Now, this is all kind of at the beginning of the loan, so there's no loss that's actually been experienced. You still have all of your stuff. And then the other part is the sort of Lucrum Cessans, where he says that you can't sell what you don't have, which is a very interesting way of putting it. And it just seems like obviously true. Like you can't sell something you don't have, and so you can't require someone to give you the profits you could have made from your money. And he specifically says that you can't sell this. At least he uses that term. So, the thing that, as I looked at it more, the thing that caught my attention is he never actually calls this restitution. He only says this is avoiding a loss. And the thing that's kind of gotten me more and more is there seems to be a very clear distinction between avoiding a loss and restitution. So restitution, the act of restitution, is this restoration of a loss already having been suffered. And so, like, even when you enter into the mutuum, like, the restitution is when the borrower restores the thing given. And so the thing has already been given away, it's been used up, it's gone. Whereas in avoiding a loss, it's less about that you've lost something and someone's restoring it to you. It's that it's a more preventative measure. And so it's like you're agreeing ahead of time. And like one of the things I keep thinking about is like transportation costs. And this is just as true in sales as it would be in loans. So, if I buy something from a company and they ship it to me, I pay them for the shipping amount. But they're the ones who are actually, contracting to have it shipped by somebody. And so it seems like that is the sort of, avoiding a loss. And then in a loan, shipping the what's it called? Yeah, shipping the species, like the coin, and paying for that. Like, okay, well, yeah, that makes sense. So you're avoiding a loss, and so it seems like there's no real strict obligation of restitution there, because restitution comes from the one who like causes the loss or occasions the loss. Now, part of what that occasioning is it seems that the way that it's sometimes talked about is that the mutuum is the cause or occasion of the loss. But like it's sort of an accidental source of it. And Aquinas has this really interesting distinction. And so, first thing is that this avoiding a loss, vitare damnum, in the Latin, that exact phrase is used in the context of sin as much as it is in like property. And so it's a generic principle of pursuing the good and avoiding evil, avoiding a loss, the loss of your soul maybe. And so Aquinas really makes this interesting distinction when he's talking about sin. I'm going to see if I can find it really quickly. And of course, yeah, I don't know where my De Malo is, but he makes this distinction between so the argument, the objection is that, well, it seems that God occasions sin by giving us the Ten Commandments. So by giving us the Ten Commandments as something to avoid, he gives us this occasion to sin. And it's like, oh man, that's a really interesting argument that, oh, God gives us he tells us it's wrong. It's just, the more I think about it, I'm like, oh, that is like a really, yeah, now I'm worried where my De Malo is, because I didn't put it back up on my shelf. Oh, I was looking for a different color. That's black on the top and white on the bottom. Yeah, it's a really super interesting argument. But it's one of the few places that Aquinas does talk about, occasion to sin and avoiding sin. So it's in the De Malo question 3, article 1. So on the causes of sin, does God cause sin? And so a response to the 13th objection, but the objection goes, one who provides the occasion for injury, or that's probably loss or damnum, seems to have inflicted the injury, but God, by giving the law, provided the occasion for human beings to sin. As Romans 7:7-8 says, therefore, God causes sin. Wow, okay. It's just, The more I think about it, I'm like, wow, some medieval monk thought of that. Or maybe it was a secular priest. I don't know. But it's like by giving us the law, God causes us to sin. I mean, like he gives us the occasion. It's like, oh yeah. I mean, it makes sense in a certain sense, which is why Aquinas is probably dealing with it. So, Aquinas' response: there are two ways of being an occasion of sin, namely one when an occasion is offered for sin, the second when an occasion is taken for sin. And so I think this correlates with active and passive scandal. But the commandments are occasions for sin as taken by those whom the commandments are imparted, not indeed as given by the one who has given, who gave the commandments. So it's an occasion of sin only in the sense of which people choose to go against them. And so the apostle in Romans 7:8 significantly adds, taking the occasion, sin through the law worked in me all kinds. Did I go too far? I went page too far. All kinds of lustful desires. For we say that persons provide an occasion for sinning when they do something less virtuous, that by their example lead others to sin. So, scandal. And if one should perform a virtuous deed and another thereby be led into sinning, there will be an occasion taken but not offered for sinning. For example, such was the case when the Pharisees were scandalized at the teaching of Christ, and the commandments were holy and just, as Romans 7:12 says, and so God, by the commandments, does not offer an occasion to sin, but human beings take the commandments as an occasion to sin. So, yeah, there's that interesting distinction that what's being offered in requesting a loan is, you give me something, you lend it to me, and so only in that sense is it an occasion for a loss, and that's the reason why you restore it. You restore the very thing given. Because that's the thing you're requesting. Now, the loss that's sort of concomitant with that, if you need to pay for the expenses of transportation or something, that is something that it's not occasioned by the loan itself, but it's occasioned by you taking that as the opportunity to, you have to get it shipped or something. So it's merely accidental that the mutuum is the cause of that loss. And so I think there's a reasonable distinction there. But the thing that gets me about that is that it's not an act of restitution to restore that. It's an act of, I think, equity, because it's I think the strict requirement is that you're choosing. You could just say no. I mean, you're not necessarily obligated to it. In general, to lend. And so it seems like it's more of an equity question, because in strict justice, what the borrower is going to owe you back is the thing that he takes, which is going to be the thing you actually lend. and not the sort of concomitant or ancillary losses that you suffer because of the way you chose to lend it. But as a matter of equity, one of the things that Aquinas will bring up is that, sometimes strict justice will cause harm, and so that's where equity comes in. And so it's almost to avoid a loss. It's to avoid that loss, avoid having to make restitution of that loss, that you sort of make this preventative case. And so I think that's why he says it's something you ought to have. And so that kind of gets to the Lucrum Cessans part. And so the other thing that gets me about the Lucrum Cessans part is like, it's that second part of that sentence where he says you can't make money from what you, you can't take the profit that you could have made from your money. And so he doesn't really even address the Lucrum Cessans question. Rather, he enters into it presuming that you already have the money and you're going to lend it. So that whole question becomes more difficult to answer. Now, the priest I was talking to, I think he thought the first part was actually related to Lucrum Cessans, which is not the way that Cajetan interprets it, among others. Because clearly in the second part, Aquinas is very categorical. He says you should not sell what you don't have, and so you shouldn't be selling the profit you could have made from the money. Whereas, there's some difficulties in it's a kind of a lengthy discussion, but the thing about it is that there's a big difference between someone violating your will, your pursuit of goods, and you agreeing for them to pay you back. So one of the key things is like, can you be due restitution of those profits that you freely gave up in order to lend? And I think that's where the confusion about the restitution comes in, because it's the lender who takes his money out of his business that causes that loss, which makes it problematic, because the borrower himself is not taking the money out, and the borrower's occasioning this lender to lend something to him. He's not occasioning him to lose money from his business, except in this sort of accidental sense. And so, it becomes more difficult for me to see how that makes sense. Because what Aquinas says in question 62, article 4, is he talks about how you can suffer a loss. So you can suffer either the loss of the thing itself or something you're on the way to obtain. And he gives the example of a farmer, a thief who digs up the seeds of a farmer in his harvest. And Aquinas also has this this discussion in the sentences as well. And so the thief has to restore not only the seeds, if he still has them, but also some part of the harvest. And so then he'll also say, for a lender or a borrower who's late in repayment, so he's done an injustice to the lender, that he owes him not only still the money, but also some of the profits that the lender was on the way to obtain. And so, yeah, it's like, okay, the analogy I can kind of see. That seems to make sense. The issue is, so those are both involuntary cases, and it's explicit that he's on the way to obtain these things. And so, in what sense then does he have to pay some portion of the harvest? And so, I mean, you could equally make the analogy, well, like, if a farmer gave this guy some of his seeds that he was going to use for his harvest, does he owe him some of those fruits as well, or does he owe him the seeds? And the thing that I keep going back to is, well, you're not on the way. Like, as soon as you decide to lend, you're no longer on the way to receive those profits or that harvest. And so you've inflicted that loss on yourself. It's not something occasioned by the borrower. And so it seems like it has less to do